Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Legendary Lords in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires that, in theory, on paper, may have the potential for a really good campaign, but don't in actual practice for a number of different reasons. Starting at number 5, we have Rakarth, Beast Lord Rakarth of the Dark Elves. So on paper, Rakarth should really be awesome, because he does have the convocation of hunters over here that gives him a dilemma to be able to get various beasts in a campaign. Never mind the fact that he can get beasts either through raiding territory or through looting or sacking settlements. So there is the potential in this campaign to get a huge amount of different unit variety. That's good. That in itself is a fairly good system. The fact that it doesn't work with Black Arcs, well, that's a different discussion altogether. So that's a bit of an issue with the way that the system works. But in theory, this system should be brilliant, right? It should really help out the Dark Elves in terms of getting that much needed unit variety that they're lacking, especially in long-term campaigns. Here's the reasons it doesn't work. First off, monsters are expensive. They're expensive in terms of recruitment, which, yes, you do have to pay for, even though you capture the beast, you do have to pay for them. They're also expensive in upkeep. And while Dark Elves do have a good economy, Rakarth, specifically Rakarth, does not. So here we have the campaign, where that huge pile of cash that Dark Elves do have in their campaigns inherently could be really put to good use, but you can't really make it work from that perspective. Or by the time you make it work, someone like Morathi, Hellebron, Malice Darkblade, every other Dark Elf in a campaign would achieve far more and maybe even get more unit variety through the sake of allied recruitment. The problem is, you do have a reduction in vigor penalties. You only have a minus 10% upkeep for all monstrous units in all armies, faction-wide. So the benefit you have economically is just not enough to allow Rakarth to shine with respect to monstrous units. And then if we look at him as a legendary lord and we look at his skill line over here, that's all you're really gonna get. I mean, you can get some post-battle loot benefits and upkeep benefit for harpies, but even for his own army, let alone on a faction level, he's not really going to benefit from those monsters. And who the heck wants to maintain harpies in a campaign? So that is a big issue in itself. So the economic situation does not favor him. But what else doesn't favor him is the situation where he starts. The Great Turtle Isle is cursed, I gotta tell you. It ruined Teclis' campaign for the entirety of Warhammer 2. Now it's ruining Rakarth's campaign for the entirety of Warhammer 3. The problem is, it's just not a great starting position due to all the obstacles you have. You have a huge mountain chain between you and the east, and you also have a lot of territory to cover. Now, Dark Elves do have an economy to maintain this, but it's certainly going to be a far slower pace of a campaign than all the other Dark Elf campaigns in the game. So that is a big problem. On top of that, Dark Elves do suffer from jungle warfare more so than other factions because they rely a lot on post-battle looting and sacking settlements, getting slaves. So when you can't do that because of the distances involved in the provinces of Lustria and the slow speed of jungle warfare, you end up suffering more than most other races. Now, one could argue, well, you could just go over to Nagron, right? You can confederate Karen Carr. Relying on confederation of Karen Carr to make your campaign work is questionable at best. Say what you will about Lokir, it's a benefit if you get Karen Carr, but it will also be a significant drain on resources in order to make it work. And Lokir, quite crucially, does not rely on Karen Carr to make his campaign work. And also, Lokir has a much easier way of getting to Karen Carr. Because you look at Rakarth's campaign, he starts over here in Turtle Isles. the way to get to Karankar or to Nagrand is to get through this Underworld sea lane. But really, the distance is so large, you're probably just better off getting this sea lane, getting over here somehow, and then teleporting right here. So instead of going north, you're better off going to the sea lane south, wasting some turns on that, then doing this sea lane, then jumping to the sea lane to the north. As you might imagine, this is much slower than what Lokir can do in his campaign. If you want to have a Nagrand-focused campaign, which actually would work much better for a Karth, but if you want to have a Nagrand-focused campaign or Northern campaign, you're going to get their slowest of all the Dark Elf Legendary Lords. All of them. Like, you're the worst positioned to actually get back to Nagrand. And funnily enough, Rakarth would actually benefit quite a bit from a Nagrand starting position, because he would then get various different units that are, reliant on him attacking elf settlements or dark elf settlements or all that. Yes, you can get, sea bells or raiding mountain regions to get hydras or carabdises. Okay, but you're not going to get dragons. You also don't even have all the lovely monsters in the game. You have a selection of them, and most of these monsters are feral. And the problem with feral, manticores, wyverns, and all that kind of stuff, and stegodons, is that you can't control them in a great way. You're not a lizardman, suffice to say. You're not going to have that level of control of those monsters, so their combat ability is not going to be as good as you would want it to be. Which in itself is another problem for Rakarth's campaign. So all of these things combined, the starting position, the lack of economic benefits to make his playstyle work, the inherent dilemmas of Dark Elf campaign do end up making his campaign not worth playing. It is the worst Dark Elf campaign by far. It's quite a tragedy, really, because when you look at his character, you look at a voice actor, you look at what he was able to do in the past when he had a better starting position, it could have been a lot more interesting. Like, I would love to play this campaign in Albion in Warhammer 3, I gotta tell you. That would be a lot more fucking fun. But instead, you're left dealing with Lustria. GG, well played on that. And number 2, we have Zhaitan the Black of the Chaos Dwarfs. Now, you look at Zhaitan as a Legendary Lord. He does get an extra convoy of the Chaos Dwarfs. On top of that, in terms of his special skill line, he gets extra casualties post-battle, labor gained post-battle, he gets regeneration, upkeep casualty replenishment, armor for his army. He is a fairly good Legendary Lord. He inherently gets more casualties post-battle, local recruitment capacity, and sadistic snare. So by all accounts, through faction effects or Lord skill line, he's a pretty powerful Legendary Lord, and the Chaos Dwarfs are absolutely a powerful race. Having more convoys is really useful for Chaos Dwarfs, especially early on, because it gives them more labor, more materials. Cathayan caravans are not necessarily worth it, because they just give you money and there's other ways of earning that. But with Chaos Dwarf caravans, you get a spike of labors and materials that you can use, and then items and various other things that you can get in a campaign. The problem, however, in Zhaitan's campaign is where he starts in the kind of campaign dynamic he has. So Chaos Dwarves inherently do want to fight a lot of battles very quickly in order to get labors, and in order to get influence, instant construction, money, etc. But the problem is, if you look at the Stoneski Foothills, if you look at the Eastern Steppes or the Red Wastes, you see a situation in a campaign where a lot of this territory does take a good amount of time to traverse. So your campaign is inherently slower. Now, this in itself would not necessarily be a deal breaker. What is, however, a deal breaker is that you also have a tier 1 initial provincial capital. And for Chaos Dwarves, this actually hurts them quite a bit because of the way materials work in a Chaos Dwarf campaign, where it just takes a good amount of time to be able to pick them up. On top of that, he has Grimgor in his backside. So that means that while you're expanding east, which is your inherent campaign objective, you're also going to be faced with a threat from your rear. Now, you might hope Tamarkan or Kolek can end up fighting Grimgor, but that is a big if in this campaign, and relying on the AI to help secure your flank is questionable in the best of times. So everything about the starting position, the dynamics of it, ends up ruining Zaytan's campaign in a substantial way, and it ends up slowing him down by a fair amount. He does have the ability of building up in a way that others can't, but he can't even ally village properly for a while, because you will want to take control of these gates to a degree or another, or you'll want to gain control of the eastern steppes completely, and Village has a tendency of taking the Dragon Crossroads either himself or his vassal. Sure, he might obliterate the gates himself, absolutely, but you can't ignore Grimgor. And the problem this creates is that you're also going to be in a situation where you're achieving your short campaign victory conditions, which give you a significant benefit in terms of raw materials and workload requirements, is just not going to be available. You can make it work if you put in a lot of time, effort, energy, etc., but it is certainly a mess of a campaign. I mean, we can also talk about the Granite Spikes camp over here, which is like just one of the worst camps that CA has ever positioned in a campaign. But there's a lot of things about this campaign that just flat out don't really end up working in the way that they should. So it ends up hurting you quite a bit, and it's quite a shame because Zaytan otherwise would be a very powerful Legendary Lord. Astrokov and Drazov are really fun, but not so much Zaytan. And finally, at number 1 is Grom the Paunch, a Legendary Lord that should have a much better campaign than the one that he's saddled with. But the problem in Grom's campaign is that, unlike Zaytan and Rakarth, where you have a really bad start, but you can kind of make it work if you put in a lot of time, effort, energy, more so than for other Legendary Lords of the race, Grom's campaign is neither great in the early game or in the late game. So he's got the worst of the bunch in terms of campaign situations. Keep in mind, I'm talking about here Legendary Lords here that are good, but they do suffer in their campaign. So Grom does have a ridiculous amount of power for the Cauldron, for all the benefits he gets for that Cauldron situation, his skill line, the fact he starts with a Casualty Replenishment hero, his initial opponents are very weak. But here are the problems in Grom's campaign that he does have to deal with. He starts with Massive Oracle, which is only a tier 1 settlement. It's the only suitable climate settlement in his campaign initially, unless you're willing to go into the mountains, which, yeah, that's not going to work out very well for you either. So you have this significant limitation from the very beginning. Then on top of that, you have unpleasant climate in all of Bretonnia, and even if the climate was pleasant, Bretonnia is not really a great area of the campaign map. Though Bordeleaux is a fantastic settlement because of all the growth and benefits that you can get for it, but still an issue. Then you have Ulthuan. So Ulthuan is suitable climate, so you have a really shitty start for the first couple of turns, and you can just rush for Ulthuan with a bunch of crap tier units, but you can make it work. However, this campaign situation will only really be great to do once. Play this campaign once, conquer Ulthuan, similar to how Nakari's campaign is, like just one and done, and then that's kind of it. Because what you then realize after you take all of Ulthuan, assuming you do take all of Ulthuan, you'll end up in a situation, in a campaign, where you realize that expanding beyond the borders of Ulthuan is not really going to work out. Because all the Legendary Lords of the Greenskins are very far away from you, the climate that's suitable is far away from you, and so you end up with limitation after limitation after limitation in a campaign. So it's a one-and-done deal. It doesn't work in the early game that great, it's limited in the early game, and it's limited in the mid and late game. You don't have the same fun as collecting the other Legendary Lords, which you do have in every other Greenskin campaign to a degree or another. Even in Warzak, who is also pretty far away, but at least he can work his way towards there in a natural way. Whereas with Grom, you don't have that kind of situation. So his distance, his terrain situation, his limitations of campaign start do end up hurting Grom in quite a substantial way. He's one of the more powerful Legendary Lords in the game, absolutely, but he also ends up suffering as a Legendary Lord far more so than others. And actually, the Greenskin nerfs of Omen's Destruction, while very appropriate for most part, because Greenskins were absurdly fucking ridiculous, while some of the changes did end up working for every other Greenskin Legendary Lord, they didn't end up working for Grom. So he ended up actually losing out because of the Omens of Destruction, quote-unquote, rework for the Greenskin. So he needs a better climate situation, he needs a better starring settlement, or maybe a better starting province. Like, really, Massive Orc should be really with Paravan over here, or with the Reaver Brienne as a province. That, I think, would make things a lot better in this kind of dynamic that he has to deal with. He's surrounded by opponents, everyone hates him, no one's going to get along with him. It can be a hell of a campaign, I'm not going to lie, but it does feel like you're playing against the game and the limitations of that game as opposed to playing a really fun and fulfilling campaign. So that is something that does end up hurting Grom more so than any other Greenskin Legendary Lord.